So Vox Day did a live stream about freedom of speech, and in it he went over the J.B. Burry argument again, but he has discussed the second point slightly differently, and there was just one more thing I wanted to say about it.
The second premise is that it's difficult to hide thoughts that have any power over your mind. Okay, well, let's forget the whole power of your mind. The second premise is that you can't prevent your thoughts from becoming speech. I think that's false. He's couching it by saying, well, it's difficult. So
this was kind of implied in the blog post, that the distinction between something being difficult and something being impossible is one of degree, and maybe J.B. Burry is saying difficult just to give himself a bit of wiggle room. I think that depends on what you mean by difficult, and there's two possible definitions. The first one is like saying it's difficult not to swear when you accidentally hit your thumb with a hammer. Or in the film Who Framed Roger Rabbit, when Dr. Doom is tapping on the wall, shaving a haircut, Roger finds it difficult not to say 2 bits. Vox is saying here that really, when J.B. Burry says difficult, he's using difficult in this sense to mean things that weak-willed people can't avoid doing. But there is an alternative definition, which is a bit like saying it's difficult to hold a cup of coffee while you're doing your laundry, while you're driving a car. Not so much that the thing itself is difficult, but that it makes the thing you're doing more difficult because of it. And in a general sense, J.B. Burry is saying, or could be saying, if you can't turn your thoughts into words, it's difficult to live, or difficult to live as you should live. And luckily, someone asked Vox how we ought to live, and he says it here.
Lift weights, get in shape, stop being a coward, start looking to get married and build families. Figure out what you have to do it.
And that's a pretty good definition. J.B. Burry says something similar. If a man has any natural rights, the right to preserve his life and the right to reproduce his kind are certainly such. So actually J.B. Burry takes that in a very different direction, but we can say roughly the way you ought to live is the way you have a right to act, or you have a right to behave in the way that allows you to live as you should. Now, someone else in the live stream comments asks Vox about difficulties he's having doing this, difficulties he's having finding a wife, because so many women have views that are very liberal, or at least very liberal compared to the people who are watching this live stream. And this is Vox's response.
The problem is that all the soy boys are afraid to tell the women that they're interested in, look, you're absolutely wrong and your views are not acceptable and you need to change.
He then goes on to tell this story about Space Bunny, who is the woman he would go on to marry. They're still married.
When I was dating Space Bunny, we went to a bookstore, and she had something political on her checks, something that I totally disagreed with. And the woman at the Barnes and Noble store, because we would go there and pick up books every Friday night, said, oh, nice checks. And I snorted audibly. And the woman said, what? You don't agree with that? And I said, no, not at all. And I was just, openly dismissive of it. And she starts telling me, well, you're a bad person and blah, 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 and all this sort of thing. And I just looked at her calmly and said, would you please ring up my books so I can pay for them? And it was kind of funny because, Space Bunny was kind of cracking up, and we walk out, and she says, so do you get that sort of thing a lot? And I said, yeah, pretty much. I said, it's no big deal. I said, I mean, honestly, what the hell do I care about what some, chick who barely has enough education to get a job, ringing up at the register of the Barnes & Noble. And, she laughed.
Okay, so how would that story have been different if the cashier at the Barnes & Noble could have called the police? Say you were in a Soviet country and the message on the checks was something in favor of communism, or you were in North Korea and it was something positive about Kim Jong-il. I think you would, well, maybe Vox would say that you shouldn't be a soy boy and you should just say it anyway. But, going to the gulags probably won't do your love life much good either. But let's suppose that you are intimidated into silence. What would the result be?
A lot of you guys have it totally backwards. You think that, oh, well, maybe if I tell them what they already believe, then they'll like me better. They won't. They'll have contempt for you.
So perhaps you've said in private to Soviet Space Bunny that you don't believe in communism, that you think it's all rubbish. But then out in public, when someone asks you about it, you snort audibly, but when they follow up, you say, oh no, sorry, I was thinking about something else. No, all hail the leader, because you don't want to be killed. Maybe Soviet Space Bunny would agree with you for doing that. She'd understand that that's what the situation demanded. But I think there is something objectively contemptible in not speaking publicly, even if it's understandable. And if natural rights mean anything, it means being able to live in a way that isn't contemptible. Now, a few people question Vox about this on the blog and in the live stream, and it seems like maybe his argument is that if we got rid of freedom of speech, then people wouldn't be allowed to write things on checks that he disagreed with, and therefore the situation wouldn't arise. But I think that's a bit too optimistic. Someone does ask how we can be sure that the rules we live under without freedom of speech will be rules that we find agreeable, specifically how we know that they aren't going to be Islamic.
If blasphemy laws should be implemented in Western countries, does that make the case for laws against slandering Muhammad? No, because the West is a Christian country.
Is it though? It was, but I'm not sure if Vox here is talking about the West as he wants it to be, or the West as it actually is. There was a recent story about this in the UK.
Suspended. This is what happened to a UKIP member called Sebastian Walsh, who was 19 and suspended from his university over, quote, offensive and inappropriate comments. Oh, Sebastian, how could you? So he was suspended from the University of Central Lancashire and has been suspended after making comments about the Islamisation of Britain and halal meat. In a letter to Mr. Walsh, the university said, specifically the allegations are that you have made statements within the classroom to the effect of saying, the country is being Islamified, that people who do not speak English should not be paid for because this is our country, and that the practice of halal food is disgusting and barbaric, and that you would have to kill yourself if you ever ate halal meat.
Now, my sense is that Vox wouldn't mind people saying that. But there are probably things in Christianity that he would mind you saying something similar about. Now, there's a passage in History of the Freedom of Thought that discusses this. J.B. Bury mentions Thomas Woolston, a fellow of Sydney College, Sussex, Cambridge, who wrote 6 aggressive discourses on the miracles of our Saviour, paid the penalty for his audacity. Deprived of his fellowship, he was prosecuted for libel and sentenced to a fine of £100 and a year's imprisonment. Unable to pay, he died in prison. He does not adopt the line of arguing that miracles are incredible or impossible. He examines the chief miracles related in the Gospels and shows with great ability and shrewd common sense that they are absurd or unworthy of the performer. So, would Vox find that something worth snorting at? Would that be something illegal under the system that he proposes? Or would it be completely fine? He is he was raised a Baptist, I understand, but doesn't go to church. But he does describe himself as a Christian. Is there any way of telling whether we could criticize the story of the unripe figs or the story of the Gadarene swine without going to prison? How do we know what we are and aren't allowed to say? It seems like all we can do is ask Vox Day and hope for the best. Maybe he does have a system. He repeatedly says that everyone who asks him about these kind of questions are being stupid, but he never says stupid because obviously you can say those things or stupid because obviously you can't. If we're going to have any kind of system of speech, it needs to be one that everyone understands without having to ask someone clever to explain it to them. And the system of free speech, which says that basically you're allowed to say whatever you want, including things that aren't true, as long as it doesn't cause direct harm to someone, I think is the only system that everyone is going to be able to grasp. Try explaining your system to the woman at Barnes and Noble.